Many of us grew in disadvantage, and we've never truly understood the ways of the opulent. We've never really understood the ways of the wealthy. We don't understand what happens in those corridors. And many of us, because we grew up in disadvantage, provision was tied to a sob story. Provision was always tied to a sob story. They always used to be complaining anytime provision was provided to us. When you asked somebody for something, the first thing they would have to do before they gave you that money, while they're holding that money, they would have to tell you the amount of hours they worked for this money. Hello, somebody. Am I triggering somebody this morning? Am I reminding you of your childhood? For some of you, some parents, am I reminding you of yourself? Am I reminding you of yourself this morning? While they're holding the money, they will tell you the amount of hours they worked, the amount of overtime hours they had to work for this money. They had to remind you how long they saved up for the money they were giving you. I remember when we would go to university, they would sit us down. Every single time before you left the house for university, the parents would sit you down and they would remind you how long they had to save up to afford to send you to school. That's my husband. She says, that's my husband, woman of God. You're going far. You're talking about the parents. That's my husband. That's my husband. Provision was always tied to a sob story. Somebody had to remind you what personal joy they had to give up to provide for you. They had to remind you what personal sacrifices they had to make to give this money to you. The story was meant to help you understand the gravity of the sacrifice, or the gravity or the importance of you making sure that this money counts. Provision was always tied to a sob story. But I'm sent on assignment this morning to tell you that the God we serve is a sent, settled, and sorted kind of God. This morning I want to tell you that we serve a God that does exceedingly, abundantly above all we could ever ask or think. Because the storerooms of heaven are full of provision. And God is always ready and willing to provide for his children. He's always willing and ready to provide for his people. He's always willing and ready to provide, and it never comes with a sob story. That's right. Somebody says, before you get a new pen, you had to bring the old one. You had to prove that the old one was finished. I think I'm taking some of you way back this morning. You're like, woman of God, you're taking me way back. You're taking me way back. So there was always a sob story that was tied to provision. When you have grown up in disadvantaged prayer governors, provision always came at someone else's expense. And they always needed to remind you that you have received provision because someone else lacked. I want you to know that we are sending you to university because we didn't send your brothers to the primary school of their choice. I want you to know that the reason why provision exists for you is because we are not driving the car we want to be driving. I want you to know that the reason why you're going to your dream university is because your little sister is not going to be able to go to the school she wants to. I want you to know that the reason why you are at the place where you are going to this particular school is because we are not in the house we want to be in. So provision always came at someone else's expense. No wonder we have an unhealthy relationship with money. Because every time somebody provided to us, it always meant you had to carry the emotional burden of someone else lacking. Oh, but I'm sent an assignment this morning. The Lord says, tell them there is an abundance in my kingdom. I am able to do exceedingly abundantly above all they could ever ask think or imagine. I am a sent, settled, and sorted kind of God. Prayer governors, we serve a kingdom where there is no limitation. We serve a kingdom where there is no lack. We serve a kingdom where there is no poverty. We serve a kingdom that has resources in abundance. And some of us, we think to ourselves, maybe because our neighbor got provision, we can't ask for the same thing, because to us, provision has always been wired and connected to you receiving or at someone else's expense. You had to carry the emotional weight of knowing someone else was going to a school they didn't want to go to. You had to carry the emotional burden of knowing your parents were not driving the car of their dreams. You had to carry the burden of knowing that your parents were not living in the house they wanted to live in. They were not living the life of their dreams as you were pursuing your education. And for some reason, this was meant to encourage you. It was meant to encourage you to pass at school. Hello, somebody. It was meant to encourage you to not waste their money. It was meant to encourage you, but because of our background, provision came at someone else's expense. Prayer governors, when you grew up in a disadvantaged home, provision was usually associated to bare minimum. And you must just be grateful because you received that bare minimum. There was a shoe you wanted. Some of you, I'm taking you back today. There was a shoe you wanted. I remember back in the days, there was this particular shoe. It was called a Wayne Brainer. Who remembers the Wayne Brainer? I don't know if you remember the Wayne Brainer. The Wayne Brainer was a shoe that sort of, it was one of the toughest shoes. It was one of the most, somebody says, woman of God, I remember the Wayne Brainer. Everybody wanted the Wayne Brainer. I remember I was in primary school and I wanted a Wayne Brainer so much. I wanted it so bad. I was praying about it. I wanted the Wayne Brainer so much when I was in primary school. But the Wayne Brainer was expensive. And we were also quite a few kids in my family. Back then, I think my sisters hadn't been born, so it was just me and my twin brothers. It was 3 of us, and all of us needed school shoes. I wanted a Wayne Brainer, but I had to be grateful that I got whatever I got. Yeah. Somebody says if you came back with Wayne Brenners, it'll multiply. Let me tell you, if you came back from holidays with a Wayne Brainer, it meant that your parents had just gotten a bonus at work, or your father had just gotten a commission. Because Wayne Brenners were the real deal. Let me tell you something. You wanted a Wayne Brainer, but you had to be content. You had to just be grateful that you had shoes to go to school with. Why? Because when you come from a disadvantaged place, provision is usually associated to you receiving the bare minimum. As long as that is a resemblance of what you want. And some of you have taken that mentality and you have taken it into the kingdom.